She made it. Luke wasn't bad-mouthing you at all while you were coming. How long was the Starbucks line?
When they get the new one built on the corner down there, it won't be so bad.
Oh my gosh. Or it's gonna be awful because that is like the worst place to have a line of cars. It's gonna be so bad.
No, exact same shape. I thought like I'm having fun on the way to work, but then I'm like, I would never be able to get in and out of there.
Yeah, it's already people already get in and out of there really
That's why you
weird.
just gotta get the app.
Oh, do the order. You
I
walk in
just
and
I just mean the time
Yeah.
to get out of the like back onto the road.
yeah.
Starbucks is not worth it.
Quiet the baby.
Then you'd be a father and take care of it.
You want to come teach?
You're gonna teach Exodus then?
Yeah.
I'll have to leave. You can't
Okay. We made it through about half of Exodus 3. As the Lord leads, I think we will finish chapter 3. We'll see how it goes. I don't know if I want to start. I know we're not dictated by chapters and verses, but I also don't want to like rush into more sections without time. So we might get started into chapter 4. We might be done early. It depends on how conversation goes or whatever. So let's read all of chapter 3 again, just to remind ourselves where we're at and what's going on in the story. We'll split it up the same way. So the first 6 verses, and then 7 through 12, and then 13 through 17, 18 through 22. So if someone would start us off.
Jacqueline was distracting me, and I have no idea what you just said.
I'll do 1 through 6.
All right.
Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, while the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God.
Someone pick up at 7 through 12.
Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He said, But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you, that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain.
13 through 17.
Then Moses said to God, If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Say this to the people of Israel, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham and Isaac and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt.
Someone will finish us off.
And
And I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. And now, please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty, but each woman shall ask of her neighbor and any woman who lives in her house for silver and gold jewelry, and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters. So you shall plunder the Egyptians.
Right. So we have Moses. He's out in the wilderness. He's seen the burning bush. God draws him into himself and kind of gives Moses this plan. He's like, I have seen it. I've heard it. We're going to start at verse 7 and work our way kind of verse by verse. So then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. God has seen it. He didn't start by hearing it. We saw at the end of chapter 2 that the people cried out. They didn't necessarily cry out to God. It could be that they've forgotten God. They are in a land filled with many gods. There's a lot of things that could be at play there, but they just cried out. They were afflicted. New king comes up, and they need help. So they cry out to God, to something, but God hears. And that's where we ended chapter 2 with the anticipation of God knows the affliction of his people. He cares about it. He's not an absentee God, and he's on the move. When he says this, he doesn't say, I heard him, and so now I'm acting. He's seen their affliction. He's been watching over them this whole time. He's not been an absentee God. So he has seen it and he's heard it. He knows. And it's very much like our affliction. When we're in trouble, we cry out. Sometimes we cry out to God. I think in our culture today, it's at our lowest of lows that people decide, God, get me out of this thing and I will follow you. That's not what the people of Egypt or people of Israel were doing. But it shows us that God hears our cries. We may not necessarily know where to cry. We don't know how to cry or what to say, who to say it to. But God hears. He knows because he's been watching. It's not because we cried out that he heard. It's because he's been watching that he saw and knows and then hears our cry and then responds. So he's coming down, and this picture of him coming down to deliver the people out of the hand of the Egyptians shows a lot. It's not Moses who's coming to save them. Back in chapter 2, Moses goes, he kills the Egyptian and then confronts his brothers who are arguing, like, why are you guys doing this to each other? Like, we need to stop the Egyptians. They're the ones who are the taskmasters, and the Hebrews are like, who are you? Like, who do you think you're a judge over us? Has God made you in charge? It's not it's not Moses who's doing the saving. God has to descend in order to bring his people up out of the land. Brings them out of the land. He's got a place for them to go. We talked about this last week, that God's preparing a place. He has this land full of evil people, right? The Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, a couple others that aren't mentioned here, but when that list gets mentioned in other places, you've got some variation. But that land is being prepared for them. They've been cultivating it. It's a good land. It's plentiful. It's pretty much in the same, it's kind of the same area. It's interesting if you think about I think it's latitudinal, whatever the line goes across, the agricultural area is kind of the same. But Egypt is not being described as plentiful. Canaan is. This promised land that God's preparing for his people is being described as plentiful, full, lush, and that's where God has designed for his people to dwell. So he's going to come down, take them out of their suffering, and put them into a good land. And he says again, and I think we did talk about this last week, so we backtrack a little bit, but 9 and 10, are like the central piece to what's going to happen for the rest of the book. He says, "And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." Those two verses mirror each other. They have that "and now" phrase there twice. It's not in the ESV, but I think it's the King James that they both say, "and now, this is what's going to happen." It says, "And now I have seen the cry. Behold, I have seen it. We're going to do something about it. And Moses is going to be the vessel to use." And we start to see Moses's his resolve as he saw the burning bush. When God calls out to him, he says, "Moses, Moses," and he says, "Here am I." We think, great, Moses is going to respond. He's going to listen. And it's going to be like he's all for whatever God has planned. And then he finds out, oh, I am part of the plan? Hold on a second. Who am I? Right? He says, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh to bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" And God says, "Behold, but I will be with you, and this shall be a sign for you that I have sent you. And when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." So what's interesting about this sign is, what do we know about signs typically? Where do they happen? Do they happen before the thing or after the thing is done? Before, right? So it's like, hey, this is what's going to happen. Here's the sign. I think of Gideon and the fleece. He lays the fleece out looking for a sign from God on what's going to take place. He puts it on the ground, prays for dew to be just on the fleece, and then everywhere else be dry, and then asks for a second sign, and then it's reversed. We think of signs as coming before, right? This is the sign that this thing's going to take place, right? And then the thing is just like, okay, that's the promise. Here's the sign. Now I know because the sign took place that it's going to happen. We get an opposite thing happening here. He says, "I will be with you. This is the sign that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." That's the sign. So the sign comes after, which is interesting because we so often think about, like, if I have a sign, if I know this is going to happen, I know what God says is true, I can trust in it because I've seen something special. But God is not giving Moses something special to see, at least right now. We're going to see it in chapter 4. But first he's like, here's my promise. I'm going to bring the people out of the land. It's going to happen, and you guys are going to be here, and you will know that I have taken you out of the land because you're going to be here to worship. I'm going to draw you out of this oppression. You're going to go to this good land, but the good land that's going to be shown to you is going to be known by you're coming here to worship. So Moses is going to go back to Pharaoh, say, "Let my people go," and it's going to happen. But we're going to see here that there's a couple of things that need to take place ahead of time. Let's see real quick if I missed anything. I know we talked about it last week, or that section last week.
It's funny that God never really encouraged Moses after Moses was like, "Who am I to even go?" And God's like, he could have said, you're great. I'm going to make you great. He didn't say anything. He's like, "I'm going to be with you. Don't worry."
Yeah, it's true. It's good.
Even though you're not worthy.
Yeah. Fair. Okay, cool. All right, let's go to verse 13.
Just think, you're not great, so take your brother too.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what happens when we go hunting and fishing. I can't do it on my own, so I need Matthew to come with me because I can't do it. All right, verse 13. Yeah. I didn't fall out of the boat. I just shot and then didn't have my footing and almost fell in. It's awesome. All right, Moses asks for a sign, doesn't get it. Verse 13. God says to Moses, "If I come to the people and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" We think like the people of Israel should know who God is they should know who Moses saying was like, I say the God of your fathers, and they're like, oh, okay, that God. Well, that God is important because they're living in Egypt. Egypt is a polytheistic culture. They have gods for literally everything, right? They've got sun god, they've got moon god, they've got fertility, they've got crops, they've got household gods. All these gods are based on, they've got gods in specific locations. They've all got different powers. They are in a hierarchy. Pharaoh thought he was God. Like that was the whole idea that the king he was a descendant of God, so he was God. So for the people to ask, we think that Moses's objections to God's plan are all kind of like off base. Like Moses, like God said he's going to be with you. Like it's going to be okay. But when you get down to like the practical nature of what he needs to do, he's got to go to the people and tell them, hey, your God has called me to come bring you out of the land. They're going to ask what name because they've lived in this culture for 400 years. There's a ton of gods that they have learned. Probably some of them have been following those gods as they've lived as slaves in maybe particular people's households, or even some of that leaked over into the land that they lived. And why can't I think Goshen, thank you. It's like the G, and I kept thinking Gershom, but that's Moses' son.
And did you say God had been pretty much silent that whole time?
Yeah.
So they don't really have 400 years is a long time.
And none of this, you think like none of this is written either.
Most of them weren't alive, or any of them weren't alive when all the other stuff happened.
And all of this would have been like to know the God of their fathers would have all been passed down through word of mouth.
Right.
It wouldn't have been necessarily something that they're not reading scripture at all.
I feel like that gets weaker and weaker over time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 People may have had like a reverence for him because like the midwives, I mean, it said they feared
Yeah, so
God.
they'd heard, yeah.
So like they knew him, but maybe not worship and
Yeah.
didn't know him
Not as intimately as
Right.
yeah.
as everyone did.
And probably it would just been, maybe even gotten mixed into the shuffle of the other gods.
Right.
They've been living under this oppression with their God kind of being silent and thinking like, okay, he's just another God.
It probably looked similar to what we have today, where you've got people who genuinely worship God, that we would call our, true Christians, but then you've got people who have all kinds of other idols, and we have people who call themselves Christians, but we're like, you don't actually know the gospel when it comes down to it.
Yeah.
But like everything is so word of mouth, and there's so many distorted things now, and so many other false things, because we don't see God move in the way that they did back then. And this would have been a similar sort of setting where they're not seeing God move in the way they did back then. And there's so many other cultural things and influences that have come in.
Yeah. Yep. So we think that a lot of Moses's objections are ill-founded, but I think this is like a legitimate thing. Like these people I go to these people, they're going to ask this question. They're going to ask who you are, and beyond just oh yeah, God of your fathers. Whereas Moses, when God identifies himself with Moses, he says like, I am the God of your fathers. I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Moses knew, right? He hid his face because he knowing which God is speaking to him, he was afraid. The people of Israel are not going to be that way because they haven't been 40 years in the wilderness as Moses has. Not yet, anyway. So they asked me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said, say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. So this I am that we see translated also could be translated I was and I will be. So the interesting thing here is that as we get to God's name here in the next verse, God is not defined by his name. And this would have meant a lot for the people because they have, the people of Israel living in Egypt have a ton of gods, are around temples, altars, all kinds of stuff with these other gods. They all have a name, and that name identifies them with who they are, what they can do, and where they're at. But with God, he's just saying I am the God who was, the God who is, and the God who will be. I'm not defined by the things that you're putting into a box. I just am. Like I'm above all of that. He's not identifying himself in the same way that the Egyptian gods were. So this I am statement that we look at in John, and Jesus is identifying himself as the I am, goes back to what Moses is hearing for God's name, who he is, how he identifies. He's self-sufficient, as we saw with the bush. Like he's not taking up the bush in fuel. He is holy. He's a refining fire. And he is. Like there's no defining attribute like, okay, he helps you with fertility. He helps your crops. That's not who God is. He's the creator of everything, sovereign over it all. You don't need to worry. It's almost like you don't need to worry about who I am. Like I just am. Don't be questioning me in this way. And so he goes a little bit further here. God also said to Moses, say to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. The Lord there, we see it in the ESV as like the small cap Lord. That in the original it was Yahweh. So that's his covenant name. That's how he identified himself with the people. And it almost looks like a contradiction, right? God is saying he's above all of the names. He is the name above all names, and yet has a name. So we think like, okay, well, God's contradicting himself in 2 verses there. We don't even have to search for the contradiction. But that's how the people identified like God. And one is his name is not just Yahweh. So we think like, okay, anytime we see the Lord, like that's we see the Lord, or in the original it's Yahweh, and we think that's it. No, his name is not just Yahweh. His name is Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. That whole bit is his name, right? So he's identifying himself as the Lord, as God of all, and I'm the God of your fathers. So he's identifying himself like way up here at this like heavenly level that we can't necessarily comprehend, because he's above everything that we can imagine, but also he's that personal God. He is the God of their fathers. We think in Judges 13, verse 18. Let's go there real quick.
Verse 18.
Yeah, 13, verse 18. Chapter 13, verse 18. No, that's not right. I'm in Joshua. I'm in Joshua. That's why. Hey, LJ. I went to Joshua and was like, well, that's not right. Birth of Samson. Right, the angel of the Lord, second person of the Trinity, where we see Moses. Yeah, Judges. I think I said Joshua and then I turned to it.
No, you said Judges.
I did say Judges? Okay, I turned to Joshua. Threw me off. All right. You've got Samson about to be born. The angel of the Lord appears to Manoah, his father. And Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, please let us detain you and prepare a young goat for you. And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, if you detain me, I will not eat your food. But if you prepare a burnt offering, then offer it to the Lord. For Manoah did not know that he was the angel of the Lord. And Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, what is your name? So that your words come true, we may honor. When your words come true, we may honor you. And the angel of the Lord said to him, why do you ask my name, seeing it as wonderful? We've already identified the angel of the Lord as being a pre-incarnate Jesus, right? Second person of the Trinity. He is God. So Jesus and the second person of the Trinity falls under the same I am as God the Father. Right? We've got the angel of the Lord speaking to him now, so it's the same person. Why did he give Moses a name but not Manoah? Because Manoah, he's not identified with that name. He's not constrained to the same things that these Egyptian gods are. So for God to give Moses this name of Yahweh, the God of your fathers, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is going to be significant for the people, Whereas with Manoah and the judges, they were already identifying themselves under God's rule, right? That was prior to them having a king. So that name there is important and not important at the same time. Not because identifying God is wrong, but because it's not complete. He's putting it into human terms who he is to help us kind of wrap our human minds around who God is. But this was also the covenant name of his people. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob got that original covenant. We're consistently going back to that covenant where man's duties are not contingent on God fulfilling his promises. So for God to be saying this is to remind them, I remember our covenant. All right, I'm going to bring you into a land. You have the seed. You've got 400 years of multiplying to basically fill a land. Your land is prepared for you. It's currently being occupied. We're going to need to deal with that. But I am here and I know what's going on. I'm going to fulfill my promise. So this covenant name is to remind the people that God has a special relationship with the people of Israel. Any questions there? There's a lot to do with that name, and I think that importance is kind of lost on us as we don't kind of call God Yahweh anymore. Some people do, but no. Okay, cool. Now we get 3 predictions or forecasts for what's going to happen. So God tells Moses, I'm going to be with you. When the people ask you for a name, here's the name that you shall give them, and this is what's going to happen. He says, go and gather the elders of Israel, gather them together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt. And I promise that I will bring you out of the land of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. So he tells them, like, this is what you're going to do. First, you're going to go to the elders. You're going to go back to Egypt. You're going to go and see your people, and you're going to go gather the leaders together, and you're going to tell them this is what's happening. All right, so this almost like it's a rehashing of what he's already kind of told Moses is going to take place, but now he's going to go to the elders and talk to them. What was Moses' interaction with his people prior to leaving Egypt? Murder. Not his people, though.
He reprimanded them and got scared and fled.
Yeah. Yep. He finds out that they probably know that he killed a guy, or they know that he killed a guy, and those rumors are going to spread. And he says, what did you make us at? What is it? Verse chapter 2. Verse 14. Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? So these people are seeing Moses and thinking he's a bit too big for his britches, right? We talked about him being an idealist, zealous for his people, and he wants to get them out of the affliction of the people of Egypt. So why are they going against each other?
Where do you find that in the scripture?
Find
What you just said.
That Moses.
That Moses,
Knew
before
that.
he fled, was zealous to get his people out of Egypt.
Well, sorry, not out of Egypt. Like he cared about the affliction that they were under. Yeah, sorry, I misspoke.
In Hebrews, doesn't it say something about how to demonstrate that he was there to be their deliverer or something like that? I'll
Is that
check real
in
quick.
11?
Let me check. And then they didn't recognize him, maybe. But I don't
It could be in Acts 2.
see. Yeah, when like Stevens.
Yeah.
Let me check Acts.
It's one of those two. I think we talked about it,
Okay.
but it's a good reminder. So Moses cared about the people, so his last interaction with them is like, are you the one who's to save us? Like, who made you in charge? And that's his last interaction, is that they're questioning who he is and what his job is, like, or what his role is with them. So he that he is thinking probably 40 years ago, like, this did not end well. And you want me to go back and tell them this is what's going to happen? But now it's not him doing it. He's coming back and saying, hey, God said this. God said, we're going to come, I'm going to bring you out of the land and you're going to go to this new land. And then you get the first prediction. Verse 18, he says, and they will listen to your voice. You and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt. So he said they get to listen. So he's getting like the play-by-play, like, this is what you're going to do, and here's how they're going to respond. So the elders are going to respond favorably. They're going to respond and be like, all right, cool. What do we need to do next? Now they're going to go to the king. They're going to get another prediction. You're going to get another forecast of what takes place. They're going to go to the king together and say, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, so he's identifying with, hey, this people's God, not your gods. This people's God, we've met with him, and he says this is what's going to happen. He says he met with us, and now please let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to our Lord. What did he not ask the king?
To free the people.
Yeah. He's not saying like, hey, let us go make a nation for ourselves. He says, allow my people a 3 days journey to go worship. What was the sign that the people were going to go into their land? Worship on the mountain. All right, so Moses kind of got like this preview of the sign and then what would take place after the sign. So I'm going to backtrack because this just kind of, I just realized this. So Moses, we think Moses like, okay, he's got the sign and then the thing is going to happen. Well, he was told what the sign would be. The people are all going to see the sign and then be able to go into the land. Like, that was the promise. Hey, Pharaoh's going to let you go out into the wilderness, out to Mount Sinai to worship. And when you do that, that's the sign that you're going to be able to go into the land.
So he just wants to make sure they worship.
Yeah.
That's what his test was going.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat. It was Acts 7:25, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't think Hebrews gave that detail, but they're so similar in how they explain some of the events.
Glad you remembered.
So they're going to go to the king, and we think they go to the king like, all right, Pharaoh, we're leaving. You need to let our people go. You're going to release them from slavery, and we're leaving. But that's not how they go to request to the king. At least that's not how God commanded them to go and talk to the king. Please let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. They come to the king, pagan, evil, basically the symbol for the serpent at this time, and humbly ask. They're not demanding. They're not saying our God's better than you because he thought he was God. You need to listen to our God saying, let us go. Just a 3 days journey. We're not going far. We're still going to be within reach. We're not leaving you. All of your workforce to help you build pyramids or do whatever is not leaving you forever. We just simply want to go. Our God is calling us to go to this mountain to worship him. And it's interesting because we've talked about it because these are such familiar stories that we miss little details. Like, how do we approach today? How do we approach leadership that is pagan or evil? Like, commonly we want to like spit in their face like, I'm not going to follow that guy. But no, like he's in a position of leadership. We should also be humble to the leadership as long as we are like they're having us do what God commands, or like what is in agreement. They're not calling us to do any kind of sin, right? We can buck against the laws and the commands that go against what God says. But when we are either in the presence of or when we're communicating with those in leadership, we should be humble. Like, I'm not in charge. God places the leaders, pagan or otherwise, in place. So we need to give them the respect that they are due for the position, not for the person. So that's what they are to go. They're not to go and demand, like, my God's the real God. You've got a bunch of fake gods, so you need to listen to ours. Let us go. No, just give us a chance to worship our God. Let us do what our God has commanded us to do. Right? When in I think it's 1 Timothy, Paul tells Timothy to pray for the leadership. He's not necessarily praying that they would be converted, which is a good thing to pray for, but more so to pray that the people would be allowed to live Christian lives. Good.
You say you say fake gods, and I know what you mean. So I'm curious what you think of in terms of, do you think that the Egyptian hierarchy of gods is more like depicted in the movie Prince of Egypt, where it was like they were able to do Moses' stuff because of tricks, or do you think they actually had supernatural power?
I think they actually had supernatural power.
Okay.
Yeah.
Witchcraft.
Witchcraft.
It's Acts 7 is why you keep saying, and you're right, that Moses thought he knew he was gonna be delivered.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for.
When LJ said, I was like, oh yeah, so it's Acts 7. That's
Cool.
where he said he supposed they knew that they would be delivered by his hand.
Yeah.
It's
Sweet.
funny that this part is left out of the movie.
It's throwing me off.
Yeah. Need to go watch.
Failing on the movie.
No, you know Prince of Egypt. Dad's talking about 10 Commandments.
Another one.
We talked about that the first week. So he's going to go to Pharaoh. And I think, and we're going to talk about, we'll obviously get to a lot of those, but I think that like they legitimately did these things. We were talking in Bible study a couple of times because Randy likes to tell stories multiple times because he's Randy. And he was talking about how he had some friends that had witches in like the army, and they were talking about how like they can't do things against Christians because God stops like legitimate witchcraft from like affecting Christians. And so they were like praying that these people would be stopped and like, hey, I need to get out of this. This is not what I thought. The witches were like, hey, we can't do anything against Christians. Like, you need to get out. It's a wild story because I mean, I think these things do legitimately happen.
Mm-hmm.
Demon caused. That's a whole. I'm not studied up in that one.
Right. Yeah. We don't need to go down that rabbit
Yeah.
hole, but I usually have that mindset of thinking about it. Like, and you say fake gods, and I know what you mean. You're not wrong, but at the same time, at least early on when I was reading these kinds of things, like a kid, I was always thinking like, I am the one true God. There's none like me. And there's literally nothing else supernatural going on. These are just old people, and they can't explain the sun, so they think they ascribe to God. But I think now more like, I think there was power flowing through lots of things, and it's a more interesting study to think about how people would react even today if that kind of supernatural stuff was going on. How many people would be led astray by the signs and the wonders that would happen if that work was going on. So it's easy to look back and think, well, there were just like dumb farmers.
They are depending on the churches.
So
Being misled by supernatural healings and
perhaps maybe behind the scenes, but I mean, if it was in your face, if there was like a big pyramid with like a god-like figure who could do wondrous things but wasn't Yahweh, like would people flock to that? I think they would.
Yeah.
So it's easy to look back and think like sometimes when we talk, that kind of gets lost in the message. So
Yeah, and I grew up the same way. Like, I mean, Prince of Egypt was a lot of my understanding because I did read when I was a kid. But like you think it's tricks and illusions because that's what we think all magic is. It's like, oh yeah, how did you figure out my card? Like that kind of stuff. But no, I think there's legit spiritual stuff going on that. Yeah, and how that is today, I don't know. I don't know that.
Right.
But
Witchcraft is very much alive and well. I mean, I've had interactions with Druids and with Wiccans, and the stuff that they talk about is very, very odd.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a Wiccan will tell you that they can't do anything to anybody because they're not quote unquote evil witches, and that it comes back to them like sevenfold whatever they do on another person. But and then your druid witches are more about nature and those kind of things. But I mean, that stuff's definitely still happening.
Yeah.
And I think the card tricks, I think that's more of a sleight of hand.
Yeah, it is, but like that's what we think a lot of magic is. Like we're looking for the sleight of
Like
hand.
he had,
Yeah.
like the priests or of pharaohs or whatever had like the snake in their jacket when they threw the rod or something stupid
Yeah.
like sleight of hand. But I don't think it was.
No, they actually did that.
I think that was legit.
Well, and that's what like I think when we get into the plagues, like they copy the first. I think it's 3.
Yeah.
Might be 4.
But yeah,
They copy the first ones because that like they had the power to do that, and then God goes above and beyond, and like, hey, like you guys can only do so much. Like I can do all these things.
I think we'd be pretty naive to think that like Satan didn't see that God was trying to work and say, okay, I'm going to step up my game and I'm going to turn these into snakes as well to distract people and say, look, we can do it too.
Yeah.
Don't focus on them. Like to not allow the thought that Satan could have done that in order to deceive and distract, we'd be very naive.
Yeah. But then also Satan's limited. Like we
Right.
I think it was I don't know if it was in this class we talked about like we think about like God and Satan being on even levels.
Yeah, he could only go so far.
Yeah. Yep. Oh yeah, that was the fun rabbit trail we took last week.
Yes.
Let's not go down that one again.
It's almost kind of like is kind of in that direction. So.
I know. Okay, let's go back to the text.
So close.
All right, so verse 18. Yeah, the elders are going to listen. Then you're going to go to the king of Egypt and say, hey, let us go a 3-day journey into the wilderness. 19 says, but I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. God already is aware of Pharaoh's hard heart. And we'll get into the Pharaoh had a hard heart. He decided to let him go, and God hardened his heart more. We'll get into that when we get to those passages. But God already knows at this point that Pharaoh's got a hard heart. It's going to take some that strong hand and an outstretched arm to be able to convince Pharaoh to even let them go worship a 3-day journey, right? And is that not this like kind of the depiction of what sin is for us, right? Sin, like David commonly says, costs more than we were willing to pay, keeps us longer than we're willing to say, and I said it wrong and now I missed one. Yeah, thank you. Pushed us farther than we were willing to go. Sin requires supernatural something from God to free us so that we can go properly worship him. Right? So it's so crazy. We read these and like, okay, like there's so much depth there in who God is and how he saves his people. So he knows that that the king of Egypt will not let them go unless compelled by a mighty hand. This mighty hand in the form of plagues, the strike against the firstborn of Egypt, Passover, shows us a little glimpse into how God saves. Right? Salvation comes through judgment. God's going to judge the nation of Egypt, and he's going to save his people. Right? Through that salvation, the people of Egypt are going to be condemned, they're going to be destroyed, and they're no longer going to have power. The seed of the woman is going to succeed against the seed of the serpent. So much so that when God stretches out his hand, strikes Egypt with all of the wonders, Pharaoh's going to let him go. And he's not going to just let him go as God's not going to say, okay, you guys are free to go. Take the lack of stuff that you have and go out into the wilderness. Go travel 3 days with nothing and go to Mount Sinai and worship me. No, he doesn't say that. He's going to crush Egypt so completely that the people of Israel are now going to have favor in the eyes of the Egyptians. Right? How incredible is that God's going to let the people go and he's providing the things that they're going to need for the journey ahead and for the 40 years going forward that they don't know about yet, right? Because they travel in the wilderness for 40 years because of their stiff necks and their lack of bending to God's rules. Verse 21 says, I will give them favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and when you go, you shall not go empty. But each woman shall ask of her neighbor and any woman who lives in her house for silver and for gold jewelry and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, and you shall plunder the Egyptians. What's kind of sad is knowing what happens with the gold when they get to the mountain, right? All of it gets used to create a golden cow. It's like, hey, you're gonna leave wealthy, right? Your forefathers, Joseph and his family, came in with herds and stuff to the point where they had Goshen to live in. So they didn't come in poor, but they lost probably everything as years went on and went under the oppression of Pharaoh. But they're going to leave wealthy, and then they're going to use their wealth and prosperity in the wilderness to deny the God that they were led out by. So we see it now and like, oh yeah, they're going to get all those things, but they're going to use it poorly.
That was in 40 days. He was only out there for 40 days.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh, we're bored.
Yeah. It takes nothing. So then it's like, okay, you guys were in Egypt in oppression for 40 years. How long did it really take you to turn away from God? Who is opposed at that point would have been, for the most part, silent. And now you have seen him do work. You've seen his mighty hand. You've seen his outstretched arm. You've seen all of these plagues done to Egypt, and you are unaffected. And then 40 days later, you're going to just burn it all up into a cow. Okay. Yeah. It's sad. So Moses ends his conversation with God, with pre-incarnate Jesus. Not ends his conversation, sorry. Ends the plan, understanding what's going to take place with a pretty clear, okay, your people are going to be okay. Your people are going to be cool with this plan. Pharaoh's not going to be, and you guys are going to be able to be let go because I'm going to do a mighty work, and they're going to let you go, and you're going to go out rich. And that's the plan. It's a good plan. And he says, I will be with you. But then we go to chapter 4, and then we get a majority of Moses' objections. And you're like, dude, you just want to shake him and be like, stop. It's going to be fine. God's going to be with you. And he literally told you what's going to happen. Why are you still complaining? Why are you still kicking against the goads, man? So that's chapter 3. We have 15 minutes, but I really don't want to go into chapter 4 yet.
Q&A.
Okay. Any questions not demon related? Aaron hasn't taught me demonology yet. Okay, let's go verse by verse in chapter 4. We'll just do that. And then we'll come back to it next week. All right, chapter 4, verse 1. Then Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. The Lord said to him, what is in your hand? And he said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. But he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. Baby. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. They may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Let's stop there and go back. Okay, so verse 1, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice. He just said that they would. He's already but will they really? Are you sure? And he needs a more present sign. He's been given a sign. He knows that God's going to be with him. He says, I need something to show them. Give me something more than them just believing who I am. Because the last time I did that, it didn't end so well. Right? The last time I did that, they're like, who are you to be a judge of? Who appointed you a judge over us? And so he gives them 2 signs, right? The first one is that the staff turns to a snake, which I'll come back next week. We'll come back next week to talk a little more in depth about it. But I think anytime we see a serpent, Moses has control over the serpent. I think there's something to be said there for seed of the serpent versus seed of the woman. I think anytime we see that, when we talked earlier, I think when we were in chapter 1, we don't want to necessarily shoehorn in connections and parallels, but Moses through God, has the power to control the serpent. Right? It turns back into his staff. And we see even Moses like scared of it, right? I'll put enmity between you and the serpent. So Moses knows like, hey, and he's shocked by seeing this piece of wood turn into a snake. But he gets to see more of that power. And then he again repeats his name, right? That they may believe that the Lord, the God of your fathers, God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, has appeared to you. All right, so these signs were meant to remind the people that this God that has sent me has power. So when we see later that the magicians kind of do the same thing, it's like, okay, so there's other gods who can do this. So you're really not telling us much by turning this staff into a snake. Right? So you've got this word, and then you've got, okay, so this God also has power too. Okay, so maybe there's something about this guy, that reminds us of what happened with our fathers. Again, the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. And he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, and behold, it was leprous, like snow. I don't think this was probably the same leprosy that like they had to wrap themselves up and be like, I'm unclean. Because like leprosy was just like a generic term for some kind of skin disease. Don't necessarily know what it looked like other than looks like snow. And he was going to put it back in and then come out and it was going to be fine.
You don't think it's the same leprosy we know today? Because like you can get leprosy today from armadillos.
Yeah. I don't know because when I've looked at leprosy,
Is it white as snow? Maybe.
should you go find an armadillo and try
You
it?
just have really dry hands.
But I think even like, so when you go through Leviticus and there's the laws regarding leprosy, like they had different tests of like, okay, if it does this, it's a leprous disease. If it's a leprous disease that's not contagious. Like there's different types. So I don't know if this wording was necessarily like the generic leprosy, but it also, was it Haman? Is that the guy? I don't remember. He was dunked into the Jordan River 7 times and had to clean himself.
Oh.
I'd have to go back and look.
I feel like it was probably real leprosy because they were super
Yeah.
afraid of leprosy.
Yeah.
So it had to be gross. I mean, it had to be something that
That's
would
what I
like
think.
Yeah.
still fear.
One of those questions we can ask.
Is it? Are you trying to think of his name too?
Stages.
I think it's
Whatever it was,
Haman.
they changed his-
Haman is Esther.
Yeah, and it went back. Yeah.
But there's
Okay.
someone who gets.
Don't take the word for that.
I'm going to.
Luke said something wrong.
The book of Luke.
Commentary.
Throw it out.
So just like the super fast Google, which, take that with a grain of salt.
I mean, I would have checked ChatGPT before.
I don't know, that's getting weird too. Says that like the whiteness of snow could be like certain forms of like scaling, like if it gets to the point, and I'm thinking like, like the dry, flaky skin from
Eczema.
leprosy,
Eczema, yeah.
kind of like scaling stuff that would be whitish looking.
Yeah.
When you go to Strong's Concordance, and that is the same word.
It's the same word all throughout.
Repeatedly.
Okay.
That's better than Google.
Yeah.
But this
There's
might
20
explain the
20
whiteness.
other
Instances of that
there's
same
20
word.
other instances,
So then it probably was the one that they would have been freaked out about.
I'm guessing.
Yeah. So we got two signs that Moses can now present to the people along with these strong words of like, this is what God's going to do. He didn't just say like, I'm going to bring my people out. I promise I will bring my people out. God is a faithful God. When he makes a promise, he's going to fulfill it. So the words, it's hard to say, like we think back and like, God, you had God audibly speak to you and you're questioning him. Why? And it's more so now, like for us, like blessed are those who have faith without sight, right? Moses was questioning God when he got to, like he had a conversation with him about what was going to happen. And he's going to be God's mouthpiece to the people of Israel, and they're all going to question him.
So it makes sense to me to think that that was not Moses' first interaction with the supernatural, or you might even say like the divine. Like, if to me, yes, that would be like a well, duh. But to them, to even Moses in particular, growing up in the upper echelons of the Egyptian kingdom, like, what had he seen by that point?
Yeah,
Like,
because if they were doing those things, and
if the burning bush wasn't his first interaction with, like, oh, I need to pay attention, like, yeah.
That's a good point.
Well, that's why I brought it up.
Oh yeah.
I was going to It makes sense to me. It's not like you can biblically support it, but that's kind of...
Yeah, he probably, I mean, in the same way that he would have known if he knew his roots, if he was growing up in Pharaoh's household, he probably saw all kinds of stuff.
But like, even like your comments about like the golden calf, and again, we don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but like, if your perspective is that these people were doing things because they knew that if they built this calf, X would happen. Because there was that stuff going, supernatural, divine things going on. It's less about, oh, they got bored or something like that. Like they knew, like, well, if we do this.
Well, they were searching. It was like, this is who brought us out. Like they were looking for something physical to worship because Egypt had all the altars and all the things set up for people to go and worship and do the like attribute whatever acts to. So, yeah.
Egypt was super
So it was like a bad habit.
Yeah.
darkness there.
And it says
Yeah.
Moses was raised
Oh, yeah.
up in all knowledge of the Egyptians. So he would have been very familiar with all their gods and what they do.
And I don't know if it's commentary, it might be scripture somewhere. My memory is terrible with that stuff, but it's like it was easy to get the people out of Egypt, but not easy to get Egypt out of the people. And that's what that's...
Well, for sure, when they brought the people out of Egypt, they weren't all God's people.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's some of the Egyptians went with them.
Yeah.
Which is a common, I think, we'll get to Red Sea eventually, but yeah, I mean that's
a lot more trying to go with him too.
Yeah. That didn't end well. All right, let's stop there. We'll come back. We'll start with verse 1. We'll get a little more detail about some of those as I got time to study. I thought we was going to take longer for chapter 3 to finish up. So that's good. Thanks, guys. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you again for your word. We thank you for the knowledge in this room, the conversations we can have to help us find fuller understanding. Lord, we thank you for revealing these things to us, for showing us your nature in the story and the encounter that Moses had with you in the burning bush. Lord, help us to understand and seek wisdom and apply the truths of who you are and how you deal with people to our lives today. As we go into service, would your word loom large over our hearts? Would we look to find salvation in you through our day-to-day lives as we seek to flee from sin? Would our worship be pleasing to you, giving you all the glory, honor, and praise that you are due? We love you, and we thank you. In your name we pray. Amen.